So I got an advanced screening of this spring's hilarious and action-packed film Novocaine, and it's not for the faint-hearted. Spoilers ahead, you've been warned. Okay, so this film was brilliant, and it stars Jack Quaid as well, that typical Jack Quaid kind of character. An unassuming nobody who's an assistant manager at a bank called Novocaine, just generally going through life as a bit of a loner, playing video games online with his only friend that he hasn't even met yet in real life, and has fallen for one of his co-workers, Sherry, played by Amber Midthunder. What a name that is. But what's not so boring about Nate is that he's got this rare genetic disorder known as congenital insensitivity to pain with anhidrosis, or CEPA for short, which means that he can't feel pain. Sherry takes an interest in him and they go for lunch, then drinks, then home time. And things seem to be going well for him until 3 bank robbers dressed as Santa Claus come in and rob the place, killing the actual bank manager and taking his new beau as hostage, which he then becomes this kind of one-man army, need to get the girl back kind of character. Once the robbers take off after killing a few of San Diego's finest, Nate steals a police car and goes to chase them down to get Sherry back. He then follows one of them to this back alley where they have a small altercation, and then they end up fighting in this restaurant's kitchen, which is both hilarious and brutal. And this is the first time that we see Nate's CEPA in effect properly, taking massive punches from this ripped robber and being thrown around like a ragdoll, which in Jack Quaid fashion is hilarious. But there were a few bits that you kind of curled up and went, ooh, like that hand in the deep fat fryer scene. Now, as someone who worked in hospitality for many years, half of which in a kitchen, I can tell you that even just the smallest splash of oil on your skin is so painful and you need to run your hand under cold water immediately before it can get quite nasty and you might need some more medical attention. However, I think Novocaine is past this point though. His hand was crispy. Anyway, after a hilarious fight sequence, Nate ultimately bests this robber and shoots him in the head and kills him, which he's never done before because he's just an assistant manager in the bank, so it makes him sick. Again, bringing that human aspect to him rather than the hero aspect. He does some amateur detective work with the actual police, hot on his heels, thinking that he's involved in this somehow, and tracks down a tattoo artist that tattooed the robber he's just killed to get some more answers. Safe to say though, it doesn't go well for him as he's not built for this. I mean, this guy is a unit. But once again, another brutal fight scene takes place and Nate bests this huge guy and is getting the information that he needs to track down the rest of the bank robbers who are holding Sherry captive. Plot twist though, Sherry's actually the sister of the lead bank robber and was in on it the whole time. I do wonder how Nate's gonna feel about that though when he finds out. Nate gets the address of the first guy he killed and goes to his house to get answers, but his house is booby-trapped worse than the McAllister house from Home Alone. We see Nate take some pretty brutal injuries from these booby traps, including a mace to the back, an arrow to the knee, and a spring trap that holds him upside down. Not exactly in the best position, Nate, and it's about to get worse for you. Because it turns out that bank robber number 2 is actually the brother of bank robber number 3, and he's come looking for him and sees Nate hanging upside down from the ceiling. Whoopsies! Luckily, Nate called his online bestie Roscoe Dixon, played by Jacob Batalon, who plays a similar role to what we've seen in the Spider-Man films as the guy in the chair, who described himself as a 6'5" heavy-built geezer with a man bun and a Harley Davidson. That is definitely not true. Bank robber number 2 cuts Nate free and starts to torture him with the only weapon that he knows, pain, but doesn't really affect Nate, and Nate has to play along at this point like it's hurting him, which is genuinely hilarious to watch. All of these scenes are brutal and a bit sickening as well, which makes it great, but hard to watch to sometimes. I mean, nobody wants to see someone's fingernails pulled off in live action. But Nate realises that his online bestie has been catfishing him the whole time, and after a little scuffle with robber number 2, who Nate kills, leaving them both in a very curious position, Roscoe and Nate then set about getting Sherry back from the last remaining bad guy. Only problem is though, the police have turned up and surrounded the entire house. Nate gives him the slip by Roscoe pretending to be Nate on this getaway moped that's definitely not a Harley Davidson, and Nate finds the auto repair shop where Sherry's being held. Now we see Sherry and her brother, bank robber number 1, having an argument as Sherry doesn't want to be part of this life anymore and just wants to be with Nate, which the brother doesn't take kindly to. Nate barges in and threatens bank robber number one to let her go, which ultimately they then get into another scuffle, and Nate is completely outmatched physically by this guy because he seems to be like ex-military or something. Bad guy gets shot by the police, presumed dead, not dead. Police then get shot, one of which is killed. Nate's then loaded into an ambulance because although he can't feel pain, he's pretty banged up. Bank robber number one then steals the ambulance as a getaway car and's followed by Sherry, the female police detective who's bleeding out at this point but wants vengeance for her partner, which we've seen before, and Roscoe, who's been arrested and is handcuffed in the back of the car and is a bit of a nervous passenger. Nate wakes up after being knocked out and bank robber number one finds him in the back of the ambulance and tries to shoot him, but with Nate being handcuffed to the bed, he has to break his thumb in a spectacular fashion just to get free, and then charges a defibrillator and uses himself as a conductor whilst putting his hand on the robber's face. Honestly. The two crash, get into another scuffle, with bank robber number one breaking Nate's arm in a really graphic way. And ultimately, Sherry comes up to help but gets beaten up by her bank robbing brother. Nate then uses the bones of his broken arm like a Wolverine claw and just sticks it through this guy's throat and kills him. Now there were a lot of references or similarities to Deadpool and Wolverine in this film, which I was a bit like, but it just didn't have the same pull as Deadpool and Wolverine. The film finished off with Nate in a full body cast from his injuries and then flashing forward a year later to him and Roscoe gaming before he then had to abruptly leave to meet Sherry, who's been locked up and only has 6 months left on her sentence. So maybe a future happy ever after all? I'm sure it will be. This film was great for the action and the over-top, gruesome injuries Nate suffered, but the plot was a bit weak, I'm not gonna lie. It was kind of like an 80s or 90s, we've seen this all before kind of plot, and the storyline was just a bit meh. But the saving factors were Jack Quaid being awesome, and as I said, the action and the horrific injury scenes. I'm going to give this one a 3.5 out of 5. It was good, but it could have been finished a little bit earlier when you thought it was going to, and then it just had like an ending number 2 that came to the end of it, which was a bit like, oh, okay. Anyway, go to the cinema and see it if you've got a strong stomach. That's all from me, and I'll see you next time.